Well, hello and good afternoon from Haslingden, north of Manchester in the UK. My name is Leonard Wells, and today is Saturday the 6th of January 2010, and this is the first, what I hope will become many, letters to America. As I'm broadcasting on YouTube, I'm only permitted 10-minute slots, so there are going to be quite a few of these over the next few months, hopefully years, God willing. In the year 2001, I went to Melbourne in Australia to visit for the first time the grave of my father, who was killed there in a motor accident while serving as a gunner on a merchant ship which had taken 5 months to sail there from the UK in 1943. My father was serving in the Royal Artillery Maritime Regiment. That regiment had been formed to provide gunners for our merchant fleet at the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. We had fitted guns to those vessels to protect them from Hitler's U-boats and warplanes, and their equivalent thugs serving in the armed forces of the Empire of Japan. He was killed shortly after his ship docked, when he and his fellow gunners accepted a lift on the back of a truck to make their way into town, perhaps for a well-earned pint of beer in an Australian bar. Unfortunately, being young and devil-may-care, he did not hold on tight as the truck went around a corner, and he fell off and landed on his head in the roadway. 2 days later he died in the Heidelberg Military Hospital there from a brain hemorrhage, and was buried with full military honours in the Necropolis Cemetery in Springvale, just outside Melbourne. My parents had married in July 1939, just before the outbreak of war in September of that year, and my dear mother had only a few short weeks of married life with a handsome young man who was almost always at sea. She received the fateful telegram advising her that she was now a widow the day before her wedding anniversary. She was thus left all alone with little financial support save a war widow's pension, with me, her 3-year-old son, to raise, and with not a cat in hell's chance of ever being able to afford to visit the grave of the man she loved, over 10,000 miles away. We lived in a town called Warrington, which is situated roughly halfway between Manchester and Liverpool. Being young, my mother was able to get work, and as her in-laws lived next door, she could leave me with them while she was out at work. The work she did initially was to tend market stalls in Warrington, Stockport and Bolton, and she would often take me with her when I was off school by train, which I loved. Although the war had ended by now, there was a huge American airbase near Warrington called Burton Wood, which many of you may remember, as it was the biggest of your bases outside America. Very often on the train we would see some of your soldiers or airmen, very rarely naval personnel, in their smart uniforms, and on more than one occasion I was handed Dentine chewing gum as a way of starting to chat up my mother, who was a very good-looking woman. My mother, however, was quite used to the attentions of men, and she was still madly in love with my late father, and she always managed to fend off those attentions. But I have often wondered how different might our lives have been had she married one of those Americans. Losing her husband was a bitter blow for my mother, and fortunately for both of us, she turned for solace to the cinema rather than alcohol. In those days, cinemas were a wee bit like opium dens, as everyone, it seemed, smoked, both in the audience and on the screen. As there were some 14 cinemas in Warrington, with a programme change halfway through the week, we would go as often as she could afford, up to 4 times a week and occasionally more. As a young boy, therefore, Hollywood thus played a huge part in my education, and most of my heroes rode tall in the saddle, and the women I admired were all busty and glamorous. It has been said that America is the hands of the world, and we in Europe will ever be grateful for all that you did in both world wars to defeat tyranny, and in the case of Hitler and Tojo, downright unmitigated evil on a scale never seen in the dark pages of man's history on this earth. We here in the UK share a common language and a common heritage with you Americans, and we are largely from the same stock. In the beginnings of your nationhood, many small sailing craft left our shores, full of hopes and dreams of a better life, perhaps a better economic one, and in many cases a life in which they could practice their way of worshipping God without interference from the governments in their own home countries. I don't want to spend too much time giving you a history lesson. We lost you as a colony for all kinds of fundamental reasons, and I'm sure there were a multitude of sins and faults on both sides. I read somewhere that after booting us out of your country, you loathed we British so much that you came close to voting in the German language as your official language, which by the grace of God was lost by a single vote. However, you went on to drive on the wrong side of the road and use different weights and measures, just to rub in to us that you were totally different and separate from us. During the Second World War, you showed your enormous economic prowess and were able to produce planes and ships faster than the Germans and Japanese could shoot them down or sink them. One fact has stayed in my mind. You produced and exported to the Soviet Union over 1 million miles of telephone wire. What a staggering statistic. If we look back over the history of Europe, it is an appalling story in which we have slaughtered each other by the millions, with the 20th century being the most dreadful of all. It is thus clear that whilst we believe we are much cleverer now, and we have made huge advances in science and economic progress, man has not been able to curb his baser instincts. In fact, if you think about it, the greatest danger on earth is man himself. But after World War II, we in Europe have made up our minds never to fight each other again. And to date, 27 nations have pledged themselves to live at peace. This is a colossal step forward and heralds the possibility of a new golden age, a new renaissance. Perhaps the remaining nations of Europe may come to join our European Union. Let us hope and pray so. As the 10 minutes is about to end, which I'm sure some of you will be happy about, I will close here, and I will talk to you again tomorrow or the day after. God bless you and keep you all till then. Bye for now.